in just hours. Talks between the world's two biggest economies will begin yet again, with hopes the sides could be closer to ending their trade standoff. Discussions between the United States and China are due to start in Beijing. The White House says they will cover issues including intellectual property, forced technology transfers, non-tariff barriers and agricultural trade too. The US is not the only trading partner China is focusing on. However, Beijing has just wrapped up a major forum on its global infrastructure plans, the Belt and Road Initiative. President Xi Jinping has been keen to hail it as a success.
More than $64 billion worth of deals were signed during the summit this week. All these achievements have fully shown that cooperation achieved through the Belt and Road Initiative has followed the current trend and has gained the people's support and improved the people's livelihood, and has a special place in this world.
As you can see, China is swiftly turning its ambitions into reality, both on land and at sea. More than 5,000 participants attended the recent Belt and Road Forum, including Italy, of course, the first G7 nation to sign on. Daniel Russell was an Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian Affairs under Barack Obama, and he's now Vice President at the Asia Society, and he joins us now. Great to have you with us.
Happy to be
Let's
here.
call this a rebranding exercise, because President Xi was talking about things like taking a zero tolerance of corruption, focusing, I think, on some greater due diligence, because, let's be fair, they've had some sheer intense criticism as a result of these projects around the world.
Yes, that's right. Well, look, Xi Jinping has been saying the right things in the Belt and Road Forum. The question is whether China is doing the right things in the field in these various Belt and Road projects. And so far, the world has begun to react to the problems with bribery, the problems with environmental pollution, the lack of sustainability in terms of the financing. There's been a lot of blowback. The good news is that the Chinese clearly have heard that. The question mark is whether there will be more than just sweet-sounding rhetoric and promises. The world, frankly, has promise fatigue when it comes to China. Now, it is important that Xi Jinping is acknowledging that there have been these problems, and in committing China to a clean BRI, to an open and internationalized BRI, to a green BRI, he is sending a political message through the Chinese system saying this is what I expect. But unless that's followed up with real mechanisms, including enforcement mechanisms, to make sure that at a minimum the standards that China insists on at home for dams or for power plants are honored in the developing world, that's really the test.
I mean, the test comes when you want international investment, particularly from the developed world, because the due diligence there will be enforced by others, if not China themselves. But with the operations that they have in the developing world, particularly some of the criticism that they've come under in countries in Africa, for example, the idea that they're just colonizing there and extracting resources, is it just going to be proof in the pudding to see ultimately whether they do follow through on some of the good promises here?
Well, I'd say there are two big problems. One is, as you point out, international investors are never going to put their money in a Chinese Belt and Road project unless it has been fully de-risked, unless there's been the adequate due diligence needed. And developing countries and governments have difficulty. They lack some of the capacity in order to insist that those standards are met. And secondly, you know, there is a lot of mystery and not a lot of facts available about Belt and Road projects. There's no database of projects. There's not even a clear definition of what is or isn't a Belt and Road project. And there's also a tremendous amount of difficulty for international companies to compete because the tenders thus far haven't been open.
What about trade here? Because the suggestion as well was that this was an opportunity, and President Xi took it to say to the Americans here, look, we're ready to step forth, we're ready to have a mutual enforcement process on the trade deal, we're willing to tackle intellectual property theft, technology transfers. How confident are you on this one, that when China says it's ready to engage here and follow through, it actually is?
Well, it's a clear signal that President Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership definitely want to put an end to the pain from tariffs. They definitely want to reduce the risk of instability and pressure from the tariffs imposed and the trade approach taken by the United States government. But it's a start, but it's a long way from declaring an interest in a fair and balanced reciprocal trade agreement to actually getting one, particularly given China's long record. Now, the Trump administration has been struggling to find ways to build in enforceability in the agreement. They've been taking quite a tough line with the Chinese. Xi Jinping, though, has a long time horizon. And whether his plan is, at least in part, to outweight the Trump administration, to again make commitments, but use non-tariff barriers to restrict the access for international firms, that's really the unknown in the challenge.
Yeah, it's a good point. Even 6 years isn't a long time when you don't risk elections back at home to be voted out in President Xi's case. A healthy dose of scepticism, I hear there, Daniel. Thank you so much for that.